A couple of weeks ago, I made a video and it sounded like it kind of had a clickbaity title. It was a podcast episode about they took him away in an ambulance. Wasn't clickbait at all. If you watched it, you would have seen that Ziggy, my son, my then 6-month-old son, now he's 7 months, had a allergic reaction to some peanut butter and ended up in hospital. And looking back, that kind of seems like a practice run because this week, on Tuesday, actually, we had, it was a public holiday in Melbourne and we had a bunch of friends over. We had like 7 or 8 friends over and Jem went to go put him down and she gave him some formula, some baby formula for the first time. And I heard her screaming out from the other room. And I ran down the hallway and she was pretty distressed. There was vomit all over her, vomit all over the floor. And she just said, "Peach, he's had a reaction." And I said, "Do I need to call the ambulance?" And she said, "I don't know." So I ran into the other room. I got my phone. I called the ambulance. And by the time I ran back in, she said, "He's getting worse. His face and neck had sprung up in welts. She'd started to take his clothes off. His lips were swollen, his eyes were swollen, and he was really irritated. And then over the next minute or so, he actually lost all color and he just went really limp, really pale and limp. We were on the phone to 000 for the ambulance and we took him out into the other room. We had some antihistamine somewhere, which is, just too late at that point for something like that. But basically he just lost all color. He went completely pale. He just kept vomiting. He was extremely lethargic, unresponsive. He just went floppy. And in that moment, we just thought, this is it. Jem was absolutely hysterical. She's usually very cool, calm and collected under pressure. But she was just, sobbing, screaming, unhelpful. I promise I don't say that in a mean way. She was just really distressed. And oh my God, what a situation. I'm holding my son. I'm trying to talk to 000. I ended up handing the phone to someone else because I just couldn't do everything at once. I couldn't calm down Jem, make sure Zig was okay, and talk on the phone to the ambulance. All the while, 7 friends over or something, standing around, helpless, wondering what they can do, trying to help but not being able to help. I'm holding Zig. I don't know whether to... I'm sort of tipping him forward. I'm trying to see if there's anything stuck in his throat. I'm trying to check his face. I'm trying to make sure if he's breathing. He doesn't look like he's breathing. We take him into the other room. We put him on the bed. A couple of minutes later, the ambulance arrives and it was the worst moment of my life. Jem was absolutely distraught. She had done nothing wrong. She'd done the right thing. There was no reason for her to believe that he would have a reaction to baby formula. It was a few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks probably since the last incident to peanut butter. We had been we'd been referred to 2 different allergists and we were on the wait list. There's like a 3-month wait to see anyone about that sort of thing. Anyway, she gave him some baby formula for the first time. She did absolutely nothing wrong. This is probably a little bit too much information, but she just wanted to top him up. Her milk supply hasn't been as much lately, and he's a big growing boy. She wanted to give him a good feed. She fed him some formula, and basically he had an anaphylactic reaction, and he could have died right then and there. Yeah. In some ways, the human body is amazing. It's amazing that his little body, knew to reject it and to try and get rid of as much of it as he could, because he literally was just projectile vomiting. The whole house was covered in vomit. All of Jem's clothes, all of the floor in his bedroom, all the floor in the kitchen, my clothes just covered in vomit. And yeah, I'll just never forget the feeling of having him in my hands, and just there was just no tension in his body. Even his lips, there was no color. He was just grey like a corpse. And anyway, the paramedics came in. They had a look at him. They drew up some adrenaline. They pricked his foot. They gave him the adrenaline, did his blood pressure, checked his breathing and all that. And once he had the adrenaline, everything seemed to calm down a little bit. They loaded him up in the back of the ambulance and took Jem away. I wasn't allowed to go with them. I had to wait and see if I was even allowed at the hospital, because last time I wasn't allowed to go to the hospital. And, it all happened so quickly. They came in, took Jem, they left, and all of a sudden I'm left there with a bunch of my close friends. God bless all of them. What a terrifying thing to witness your friends and your friends, baby go through, and to stand around and feel that helpless feeling. I felt helpless. Weirdly enough, I felt calm is the wrong word, but at the time I wasn't panicking. I was just problem solving. It all happened so quickly. Surprisingly, I held it together for the whole day, until I got to bed at about 1 a.m. in the morning. Anyway, sorry, I'll continue with the story. So, yeah, big thank you to our friends. They sort of stepped in, they cleaned up a bit, and sort of asked if they wanted me to be there, but I thought it was just best if they all left. I just sent a message to the family and was waiting from Jem to hear if I was allowed to come. In about maybe 20 minutes, she called to say I can come down to pack a few things for her, because she had taken some clothes. She'd put on a new top, I think, but he'd already vomited all over it again. And I just had to bring a few things in case we were there for a long time. So I went down into emergency and I met them there. And basically on the way, I'm pretty sure while I was on the way, he took another turn. So the first dose of adrenaline wore off. Apparently it's only a short-term fix. It doesn't last that long. And obviously there was still some formula working its way through his system, and he took another turn. Same thing. He just lost all color. He just lost all tension in his body. It's like his little body was just giving up. He just went limp, and Jem said she was just hysterical again. There was no consoling her, which is understandable. To see your baby go through that is something I don't wish on anyone. Anyway, I made it to the hospital. By the time I got there, they'd given him another dose of adrenaline, and I think they had tried to give him some steroids and some antihistamines, which he couldn't keep any of it down. He just kept throwing it back up, which is not good. It's a tricky situation because you don't know how much is in him. You don't know whether to give him another dose, so they just have to wait, unfortunately. And it was very tense. We just sat there. We just watched him so closely. There was a nurse there with us. We were in, a resuscitation bay, in bay number 1. We were basically, my understanding, we're in the top priority. We're in the biggest, the number 1 room in the emergency room, which says a lot, especially I think because it's a baby. It's another level of emergency, and yeah, he was really not well. He was really bad. Like, his whole body was just, it was like one big welt, one big rash. And then over the course of the next 30 minutes to an hour, it would move around. He would sort of come in and out of activity. You know, he would be sort of quite irritated at one moment, and then he'd be crying, and then he'd be quiet, and then, you know, the poor kid was just exhausted. And it must have just been so difficult for him because his little body was just pumped full of so much adrenaline. Eventually they got some more steroids into him as well, which I think the steroids are to make the rashes and the welts go down. And I think he kept them down for about 20 minutes before vomiting them again. So that's better than nothing. Hopefully some of that was working its way through his system. And that's what happened. We stayed there for the rest of the night. I had to pop home a couple of different times. I popped home once to get an overnight bag for Jem and some more bits and pieces that Zig would need, some bottles. I had to go and get some milk from the freezer for him because obviously he couldn't have formula, and some breast milk from the freezer, mind you, not cow's milk. And yeah, we had to sit very uncomfortably in emergency. Don't get me wrong, I'm extremely grateful, but it's just the worst place in the world. Like, the lights are so bright, there is so much noise, voices, arguments, beeping, hustle and bustle. It's just the worst place at the best of times, let alone when you're sick or your kid is sick, or, you know, it is just, it's just a breeding ground for anxiety. Anyway, we were very, very grateful, and the staff were all fantastic. We waited, I think, for 4 or 5 hours there, and then I can't even remember what time. It's all a blur. It must have been 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock p.m. You know, this whole saga started about 3:30, and Zig and Jem must have been at the hospital by 4 o'clock, or maybe just after 4. So by, let's say, I don't know, 10 o'clock, 10:30, 11 o'clock, something like that, they had deemed that it was safe for him to leave emergency. They didn't think it was going to recur again, but they needed to keep him overnight just in case. He was still covered in welts at this stage. And it must have been very, very itchy and irritating. And the poor kid was just exhausted. But I mean, the hard thing is in emergency is you just, first of all, he's hooked up to all sorts of different sensors and wires and whatnot. And no matter which way you sit or lie or put him down, it's uncomfortable, and he just wants to wriggle and he gets tangled. And it's also just difficult because he basically has to be held the whole time. You don't, you know, mum didn't get a rest, although, you know, I could hold him too, but it's uncomfortable for him to be held all the time. Sometimes he just needs to be put down, you know, lay on the ground, roll around on his own accord, and he just really couldn't do that. Yeah. So eventually we were moved up to the pediatric ward, and he was watched overnight, and everything started to calm down. I think the real scary thing was we just didn't know how much of it was in his system, working his way through his system, and we didn't know if he was going to relapse again, because if he needed a third adrenaline shot, you know, a life-saving adrenaline shot, it's not something that anyone wants to do. It's a necessity. It's because it stops the reaction, or it calms down the reaction, or whatever. But if he needed a third one, he would need to be transferred somewhere with a, you know, pediatric intensive care unit. Basically, we'd need to go to another hospital 30, 40 minutes away, and things would get even more serious because, yeah, again, it's just a lot for such a little body to endure. Oh my God. Anyway, it was probably the worst moment and the worst night of my life. And it was just, it felt like watching a movie. It felt like someone else's life. Like the night itself was, the weather was horrific. It was bucketing rain. It was freezing cold. It was really windy. And, just going out to the car park between, long bouts of waiting, it was just like I would get drenched just walking from the hospital to the car park. I'll play a little clip if I haven't already, but it was like something out of a movie. The lights were so bright. It was bucketing rain. It was absolutely exhausting. Anyway, Jem stayed the night with him. Only one person was allowed to stay. And obviously it's got to be Jem because she's mum and she breastfeeds. And yeah, I went home and ended up getting to bed at about 1. Had a very restless sleep, just kept waking up, checking my phone, not knowing what was going to happen. Very restless. Woke up early the next morning, made some brekkie for Jem, had a shower, brushed my teeth, back to the hospital. And thankfully, by the time I got back in the morning, he was looking like a different kid. His welts had all sort of gone down. I think there was a little bit on his arms and legs still, but visibly he looked like a completely different kid to the night before. And I was so grateful for that. He was still exhausted. Apparently he didn't really sleep much overnight. It must have been very uncomfortable for him still. And I think poor Jem didn't sleep much overnight as well. Yeah. But anyway, things got gradually better since then. There was a bunch more, testing and observations and stuff that happened the next day. And then we ended up getting out of the hospital about 1 p.m.-ish, I think, the next day. Being a dad is the best thing ever, but it is just like, it is indescribable, the things that you go through. Like just the most beautiful, insane highs and then these just gut-wrenching lows. We're all okay. We're all alive. And in the end, we don't really know what it was. In the formula, there's cow's milk, milk protein, there's soy, and there's also traces of fish. So it could be either one of those things. And next week, we've been rushed ahead. We've jumped the line to get into the allergist to finally find out what's going on because it's likely it is allergic to a lot more things. And we've been fully educated. We've been trained with the EpiPen, and I'm just so grateful for the healthcare system we have here in Australia. The paramedics were amazing. They're so quickly. The people that work in ER, what a terrible job. I'm sorry. They all seem to love their job. That's something I could never do in a million years. That is just the worst thing. That would be soul destroying for me. Like the things that you have to deal with on a daily basis. Anyway, I might leave it there with that. I didn't expect to rant with that for so long. Anyway, that happened on Tuesday, and that's why the podcast is a little bit late this week because it's been a hell of a week since the last podcast. It's been a pretty traumatic couple of days. Last week, in fact, it was starting while I was recording last week. I had a infection in my eye, like a chalazion it's called. It's kind of like a sty, but it's inside the eyelid, and it was infected, and oh my God, it looked like I'd been punched. I had this horrible leaking, sore, swollen eye. I just had to wash the pus out of it every 15, 20 minutes. That is just so too much information for the podcast. But, for a few days last week, I was quite sick. Jem's been sick all month. She's had this, she was sick a few weeks ago and then just had this trailing cough. At the moment, generally we're just all a bit exhausted and run down, and it's been a hell of a week, and I'm glad that that's all done now. Anyway, I'll leave it there for that. To be quite honest, I don't really have the energy to talk about photo stuff today. I've been thinking all week. There was some cool things that I had to mention on the podcast this week, but I just don't quite have it in me. But I thought it would be pretty important for me to not miss a week. I'm so close to a year now. I think this is episode 50, and I've come so far. And I've got to see out the year. I've got to see it through no matter what happens. So the podcast is going to be a couple of days late, but I didn't miss. Here it is, episode 50, and I don't have a tool of the week. I'm sorry there was no photography talk. That's just a little bit of a update on what's been going on in my life. Thank you again for watching. I can only hope that next week is a little bit more energetic and positive of an episode. I need to try and organize to link up with Kurt because it's been so long, but we've just been so busy. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.